we were talking beforehand about liminality. This is a condition that I feel like that we're in collectively as a society. We're sort of, I believe, almost on the dawn of a new axial age. Things are changing. They're in flux. And we're sort of chaotic. And so liminality is this place, fixed point between, or sorry, the space between two fixed points. And it's a huge factor in what we're doing here in the LO. And Jordan, you have something that you wanted to tell us about liminality in your life.
Yeah, it just is. It's come up very clearly just in the past few days. And so I basically invite this as a mode or a way of considering for the next, for people who are going out into the world. Something like the minimum viable liminality, or how does one support somebody else in shifting into that place? And it seems like there's kind of 3 steps. And what I'll do is I'll use an anecdote. I found myself on a beach maybe 2 days ago with a kid, like a 7-year-old boy. And he drew a tic-tac-toe board on the sand. And we played tic-tac-toe. And we played again. The 3rd time we played, he does an O, I do an X, he does an O, and then I drew an X off the board, like just out in the sand. And he's like, he just kind of stares at me for a while. I was like, what are you doing? You can't do that. So, oh, sorry. So I erase it and I draw a proper X. Then he draws another O on the board. So I draw a smiley face on the board, right? An O with the smiley face in it. And he looks at me again, just sort of shocked. And then he looks for a second and he makes a move. I can't remember what the move was, exactly what it was. But it was a move now suddenly recognizing that we shifted from me breaking the rules of tic-tac-toe to us now beginning to collaborate in a open creative space. And then it started to go. Right? Then we started to really do some interesting moves. Like he drew a whole new board that was bigger, like a larger matrix. And then I took my finger and drew a spiral through all the spots instead of drawing a circle. Then he erased it completely and drew a star. And so then I found a rock and put it in the middle of the star, right? So you start just playing this game. Hey, gummit. Can you guys hear that?
Sure can. It's fine. Just switch the little switch on the side. Should be all right. There we go.
Somebody decided that this morning was a good time to send me 50 texts.
This is like a progressive commercial here. You probably don't.
And I can't get it to quit.
I didn't get that. Try tapping.
We just tell these guys to stop.
It's all right. This is why we do it live. This is not CNN. That's why you're here, as a matter of fact. Just 2 guys hanging out, talking about the future, changing the world. No kidding. Guys, if you're following along on Periscope, I apologize. There's a typo. This is not Jesse Kelly. Jordan Hall.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So that's the thing, right? There's a point where there was an ordinary frame. Then there was a violation of that frame. And the first violation was too strong. It was too far or too fast. And it didn't settle. So he kind of dropped back into the frame, which if you guys have been out there in the world, that happens a lot. But then the next move was just enough that suddenly there was like a softening of a frame and he was able to pop into the liminal space. Then there was the learning, right? And that's the piece, right? Play, actually literally play. Art, dance, play. These are all the same concept in the context of the liminal. Learning to play together. Then it started to just move, right? Then skillful play, increasingly skillful play, all kinds of interesting stuff. So keep that in mind, right? These days, what is mostly holding us back is many people endeavoring to maneuver strictly within existing frames, and or people trying to move them out of those frames with a lack of skillfulness, so they actually harden in their frames, which is the worst. And the either unwillingness or incapacity to actually take the time to learn how to become skillful in this liminal space. So those are kind of the 3 big challenges. Once you have moved beyond that, and you're actually in the liminal space and have actually learned how to play well in that, then it's a totally different game. You might say it's an infinite game, but we won't go there. Okay, so that's that piece of the story. And you said new axial age?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. To the point, right? The axial age was a forcible ejection from the old frame, right? The Bronze Age collapsed completely. Mm-hmm. and a kicking and screaming, and in many cases dying, shift, and only those who are able to successfully maneuver themselves into a liminal space where creativity and collaboration lives were able to play their way into the next thing. Okay, so let's take us back. That was a little bit of an aside, but maybe a nice tool.
Yeah, when I said axial age, I saw your eyes light up a second. That's not a phrase a lot of people are familiar with, and it escapes my brain sometimes. I find myself like Google searching the definition to remember the name because it doesn't really come up very often. But given the fundamental changes to basically everything all of our human interactions, government, finance, media, information, truth, reality, all these things, I think anybody who takes a good look at this could understand that we are certainly in a huge period of shift and change. I wanted to just go back actually real quick to this story about liminality and dropping into a creative space like that. And then you associate it with people being in their frame and unable to escape it or being hardened in their frame. What kind of activity, how do you engage that liminal space? So the first thing that came to my mind was trauma. Like, it's almost trauma is what it takes to force people into a detachment from their sort of ego attached ideas of perception and reality, and to finally be like, oh man, maybe there is something else out there. What do I do now? Does everybody need to go through trauma to get there?
Well, we have to slow down. So the answer is no, but what you're saying is right, but the languaging doesn't quite do it. So let's say you have you break a bone. Okay, so that is an intense change. If in the breaking of the bone, it doesn't set well, now you have trauma. Okay, so the trauma is what happens when you do not respond well to an intense change. From the point of view of what goes away, now this is a different thing. When you have an intense change, a moment of clarity, rock bottom, something like that, some place where what you're doing, the way you're doing it, no longer works. That's what you're saying. Like if I'm, let's see, running in a straight line, and I keep thinking I'm going to stop, but I'm not stopping, but I suddenly reach a cliff. There's a rupture in the possibility of my continuing doing what I was doing. So that, yes, generally speaking, it's very difficult to move out of a frame, to move out of an addiction ultimately. It's something that is constraining your capacity to make free choices in the context of reality, but is actually forcing you to make selected choices in the context of a frame. That's an addiction. Generally speaking, it's very difficult to escape from an addiction like that until you find yourself in a circumstance where the possibility of continuing is no longer available. So you're forced out of the frame. Now, from the point of view of the frame, this is quite dramatic, right? The frame actually is completely broken. So sure, that's true. From the point of view of the self, the question is what happens next? You've now been liberated into extremely intense uncertainty and mystery, but what do you do? And one thing you might do is you might get deeply wounded, build some kind of new frame, like try to create a new shell quickly, and then now hide behind that. That's trauma, which means that ongoingly, whenever you encounter yourself in a circumstance like that, your defense mechanism is what's between you and reality, and you're now really insulated from being able to react to reality. So you begin building up these traumatic adaptive responses, kind of like scar tissue that numbs the skin and you can't feel what's actually happening anymore. And that can be a challenge. Then now you're stuck in a loop where your own defense mechanisms have to be broken for you to get back into contact with reality. This is called healing or wholeness. But the alternative is also possible. Right? Something happens, the possibility of continuing is no longer there, but now you're actually liberated. Now can you find a way to step into responsibility? Can you step into just being able to be in some level of authentic, fluid relationship, which John Vervaeke has, for me, said evolvability. You always stay poised to be able to change your interior and exterior in relationship with what's actually happening, as opposed to getting kind of hardened in particular moments and then being unable to become responsive to what's happening in the next moment.
Not easy. it's not an easy thing to do.
We talked about this, I think, actually in a previous podcast in the context of martial arts.
Okay.
So if you're in hand-to-hand combat, if you are sort of poised, your feet are planted with just the right level of flexibility, you can move in lots of different directions. Your weight is over your center. Your eyes are moving, like you're now prepared to respond to what happens. When you've committed to a particular deployment of force, you're now reduced. Your possibility is reduced dramatically. Now, of course, the problem, as you know, if you're engaged in that kind of combat, you're also very vulnerable at that point. Right? The thing to do then is not to get stuck with your weight over your toes and with your hands out, because then you're done. You have to find a way to return back. So that's a very nice metaphor for this sort of thing. In the liminal space, it's a constant movement of trying to stay with your feet solidly placed on a ground, so that you're able to make the most fluid, poised response to what's actually happening and perceiving what's actually happening. And then you make energetic shifts. And you move, make a pop, and sometimes a stronger pop, but always returning back. And the moment that you lose that and you become the extension, you're stuck out there, now you're becoming increasingly fragile.
This sounds like an essential life skill to have, but it also sounds like something that is luxurious in time to obtain. Like, how does a normal person figure out how to implement this type of fluidity, flexibility, lack of fragility in their normal life? I mean, this isn't anything I had planned to talk about, but I know how much time and energy and effort it goes into making my physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional self able to perform and adapt and achieve and succeed in this type of environment. It's a full-time job. It's a full-time job. How do we spread that notion or this ability or this skill to more people? Again, totally random question.
I'm gonna try to do this using the tool earlier. So I'd like to propose a shift in mindset. It's a full-time job. Okay. Your life is, as it turns out, a full-time job. You are always living your life. The question is how. Every moment. How do you respond to your wife coming in and talking about getting makeup? How do you respond to a text message, messing up your podcast? Right. It's just going on. So, okay, imagine that every single phenomenon, every single experience you have is exactly the same, just different modes. I'm cooking on the grill. I'm making a phone call. I'm driving on the freeway. I'm surfing. I'm changing my baby's diaper. How do I use that as an example of this? To what degree is what's happening hardening me? To what degree is what's happening taking me out of my ability to be what I've called sovereign at the lower level, at the individual level? What kinds of things move me off? What kinds of things strengthen me? As we've talked about, simple things. Do I have bad habits in eating? Those aren't hard to fix. You're going to have to eat all the time, right? You definitely are going to eat, for sure. But there's a big difference between eating shit and eating good, right? Make better choices. Sleep. Sleep is also very commonly a thing that people do. Oh, there's a big difference between poor sleep and good sleep. Learn how to discern the difference between a bad choice and a good choice. Notice that is always a meta learning. Every choice is in some sense exactly the same from the point of view of learning how to discern the difference between a good choice and a bad choice. This is becoming wise, right? Learning how to use your experience to build your capacity to make more effective choices in all possible contexts. There you go. That's how you do it. What you'll find is that as you do that, it'll quite often, for most people, for me certainly, it's tiny bits in the beginning. Most of the time, you're playing out old habits or being battered about by the context that you're in. But some of the time, you're actually making choices. Okay. But as you make choices, and as you become more aware of that as the thing at all, and become slightly more skillful at it, that space begins to expand. As it expands, there's more possibility of learning, and more choices are now happening in a context of poise, which means that it can expand even in areas that are very hard. And certain areas are easy initially. First moment when you wake up in the morning, Do you immediately grab your phone, or do you take a breath? That first moment is a nice liminal spot. What choice are you going to make right now? And then expands. Now expands to places where really significant things are happening in your life. Old traumas are playing out, and it can continue to expand. And as we've talked about also, there's a point at which it stops being you, and it starts being your relationships. And you notice that even for you to move forward, your relationships have to begin to shift. And either the other people that you're in relationship with have to also start playing this kind of game, or the relationship is going to have to shift. You obviously can't, under any circumstances ever, choose for another person, but you can create the context where they're invited in. The context of their choice is changed. So
that's a wonderful perspective. I really appreciate that. And, again, huge influence you've had on us in the Liminal Order. We've taken the concept of personal sovereignty, broken it down into all the various things: integrity, choice, discernment, embodiment, sense making. These are things that we work on every day. And one of the things that we work on initially right away: physical fitness, health, sleep. We've developed physical fitness standards, mindfulness standards, blood panel standards, mobility, outside time, all these things. And it's the very first thing that we give guys when they join. We're like, here's the standards. Here's how you can improve all of these things. Here's the tracker. And in order for them to graduate from their new guy status, they have to show progress on the tracker. And it all starts by taking care of yourself so that you can have the strength to make these small decisions on the margin that come up every single day, then in turn, in time, as you say, can expand to encompass bigger and more important things in your relationships and your trauma and the big picture issues. I really do appreciate the way that you reframed me on that, because you're right. There are a million opportunities a day for every single person to expand, as you say, their sovereignty, to make better decisions, to be in the moment, and to think in ways that are going to enhance them and their relationships. So excellent. There's a chance to improve every single day, every minute, guys.